Hello, my name is Joshua Martin, and this is my video analysis for my lesson plan sections 4 through 6. In the activities section, I've included the different activities for my lesson. In the introduction portion, we will have a lecture and discussion where I'm going to cover the basic mathematical fractions and their corresponding musical rhythms. I'm going to model these on the board by writing out these different mathematical fractions and grouping them with the corresponding mathematical fractions or musical rhythms rather. Then what we're going to do is as a group we're going to clap through these rhythms and see how they sound. By the end of the lesson, I expect these students to be able to group these fractions and rhythms together on their own. I expect them to be able to clap through example rhythms and also create their own 4-measure rhythmic composition. After the introduction section, we'll go into guided practice. I'm going to do this through small groups. I'm going to give them a worksheet in their small group where they're going to see these fractions and rhythms and group them together as a group. They'll also clap through several example rhythms as a group, and then as a group they're going to create one original measure which they will be presenting to the class later on in the lesson. I'm going to be walking around during this section so that I can formally assess the progress of individuals and offer assistance as needed. After the small group section, we'll come back to whole group and do some individual practice. I'm going to hand out a worksheet that's going to double as independent practice as well as an individual formal assessment. On the top half of this worksheet, they're going to write out 5 different original 1-measure rhythmic groupings, much like they did in their small group section. After they finish, this will be the top half of that worksheet. After they finish that, we'll go into closing, where in the closing section, each group will send one representative from the group to write the 1-measure grouping that they came up with on the board. Now, as this is going along, we're going to have a class discussion where we will analyze each group's measure and recap the fundamentals of the lesson and how they correspond with each group's work. Once we're done with that discussion and recap session, we'll go into the formative assessment. And what they'll do there is on the bottom half of the worksheet that they got when they came back to whole group, they will have a section where they will group mathematical fractions with rhythms again for assessment. And they'll also have a space where they will create their own 4-measure original rhythmic composition, like I stated, for them to be able to do in our learning goal objectives. I chose these activities because they allow me to introduce the material to the entire group and then give the students a chance to work and practice together in small groups. It allows the students to create a product based on the skills that we introduced and allow the whole group to analyze that work. It also allows me a chance to formally assess the students throughout the entire process. All right, going down to materials. The instructional materials that I will be using are a whiteboard and markers. This will be used for my introductory section where I will be modeling the different rhythms for them. Also, it will give me with these materials, I will be writing out rhythms on the board for us to clap through, and also it'll give a space for the small group to present what their small group came up with in their activity. We'll also have the small group project handout, which is going to outline the group project and give them a chance to write it out. The next part is the individual assessment worksheet. That's going to give them a place for independent practice and a place for them to include the work that I will be using for assessment so that I can evaluate the lesson at the end. And I'll also have a bunch of pencils on hand just in case a student does not have one. That way we don't have to worry about stopping class for them to find a pencil or for me to go get one out of the office. I think I just explained this pretty well, but I've chosen these materials because they are necessary components of the activities in the lessons. Also, having these on hand will reduce any time spent in class that might take the focus away from the lesson by me having to go and get these materials. All right, section 6, the evaluation. How and when do I plan to evaluate the students during the content of this lesson? I'm going to be formally assessing these students throughout the entire lesson. In the beginning, I'll get to assess them initially within the discussion that we have to see kind of what their initial understanding is prior to completion of the introduction. Then I'm going to be assessing the students as I walk around the room during the small group activity. I'm going to be checking for each student's individual understanding as well as their involvement within the group work. I want to make sure that they're all being a part and not just sitting there and letting somebody else carry the load. The final formative assessment is going to come with the individual student worksheet where they're going to group the fractions and rhythms together as well as creating their own 4-measure rhythmic composition. I've chosen these evaluation techniques because they're going to allow me to keep a consistent grasp of student understanding throughout the entire lesson. This is going to give me the chance to step in and assist with any students that might be struggling with the content. It's also going to allow me to see, like I said, how well the students are working with others. And it's also going to provide a final individual assessment to help me decide if any material needs to be readdressed in a future lesson or if we have a good understanding and we can move on to the next module. So that's it. Thank you very much. And this has been my video analysis.